Start the recording. Reverend Heather Dunham is our speaker today. Heather grew up in a mainstream Christian upbringing, leaning toward charismatic, and was educated within the private Christian school systems until transferring to a secular school in 10th grade. The child of two singer-songwriters and musicians, Christian, country, and gospel music heavily influenced Heather's spirituality and motivated consistent participation in church choirs. At Unity, Heather also served as prayer chaplain for 2 years. A desire to serve others led to volunteering outside of church walls. During 5 years at Zach's Ridge, Heather learned to facilitate small groups and provide safe spaces for those in need. The loss of Heather's mother to cancer was a test of their faith, yet openness to all ways of experiencing Christ continues to lead the way. At their wife's urging, Heather became ordained in 2013 by Universal Life Church and has officiated for weddings and funerals. It's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Heather Dunham.
Good morning, everybody. So when I was thinking and praying about what to talk about today, one of the things that came to my heart was our theme on resistance. But most of the time, I think for most of us, if we're really honest, we start with resistance and then we just kind of end there. My challenge to us today, and encouragement, is that resistance doesn't just start. There is a path. And resistance without transformation is not complete. You have to have both. You have to be able to resist and transform and have your heart changed. And that is the path of completion. So resistance, I don't know about you guys, but I'll be honest. Especially now, as a gay person, as a human being, as a person that wants to cling to their faith and pray to something that it still matters. On most days, my heart and my emotions seem overwhelming and really quite exhausting before I ever even get out of bed. Some days, the more I think about it, I honestly just ask myself, what difference does it make? It's not going to change. And so in that brief but very quick moment becomes a very slippery slope for me, and one, honestly, that I can become very quite comfortable in. Resistance requires work, and often it's not a quick pass to seeing immediate results. And it's often clouded, delayed by things that are outside of our control. And if we're honest, in a world where we are way too comfortable with quick results from fast food deliveries such as DoorDash, Uber, Kroger's curb pickups, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, we're compromised. We are compromised because we don't have the long-term strength, the tenacity, that path of resistance, more than not, that it requires. We are required to press in and make a conscious choice to live with action and intent. Resistance doesn't just happen to us. We have to make it happen. The birth of transformation from the seed of resistance is also a deliberate, conscious choice. It is not something that just happens by accident or just stumbling upon it. There's no shortcuts. I wish there was, but there isn't. It's a long haul, and we each play a part. When I speak of resistance, it's a start, as I mentioned previously. It's the A before we get to the rest of the story that continues our entire life until we take the very last breath. Coming to understanding without that, we miss a pivotal part of that path, a pivotal part of our spiritual journey, regardless of who we center that relationship with. But we can make something absolutely beautiful out of something that in the beginning is nothing but jagged pieces that don't quite fit. And it doesn't have to remain the same, but it does have to move on and grow into the rest of the path. When we are transformed, things inside us begin to change. The understanding we have, it creates a new direction, a new path. It did for me, probably for all of us. It changes how we relate to each other, how we relate to the world around us, how we connect with others and allow our spirit to talk with their spirit. Transformation becomes a little simpler, it becomes more tangible, and we begin to understand that it's not a singular mission. It's not just about me. It's about all of us. We don't have to resist alone, that we can make a change by working together, that we can be reassured that when the road gets hard, when the road gets too treacherous, when the forces grow too big, others will be by my side. That's why we come every Sunday, isn't it? We need to be reminded that when we leave on Sunday, that Monday through Saturday, that we have a place to come back, and we are reminded we are not alone. Given on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, King opened up his speech, "I Have a Dream" speech, with a reference to the Emancipation Proclamation, which, as we all know, freed all slaves in Confederate states during the Civil War. King pointed out that 100 years after that address, African Americans were still not truly free. He went on to outline the need for and a vision of equality and justice across the country, culminating in a stirring call for freedom with the title, "I Have a Dream," including, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." King wrote his "I Have a Dream" speech in Clarence B. Jones' house in Riverdale, New York. King's lawyer and advisor was instrumental in drafting the speech, which wasn't finalized until 3:30 a.m. on the day of the event, and which didn't include the speech's most famous line, "I have a dream." King incorporated material that he had used in previous sermons and speeches, but once he began speaking, he decided to depart from his scripted remarks. He chose to use a phrase, "I have a dream," which, while not in the original draft for the speech, he had used in previous sermons and speeches. Gospel singer Mahalia Jackson called from the crowd, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." From that point on, King departed from his script and improvised, giving one of the most celebrated and significant speeches in American history. Now, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to really let that sink in. The key point in that is that he went off script. So often we hear things and we don't really let it sink in. We hear it and it goes in one ear and it goes out the other. So go deep with me just for a second and swim in the depths of that transformation moment for him. When King went off script, unmeditated, something in his core that was not there before, I truly believe, shifted. It changed. There was a fire that was born that was anew in him. And all of the things that he had done, all the marches that he had done, all the words that he had spoken, they were a path of resistance. But now the unscripted, the unpracticed words were the completion of his transformation. I truly believe that from this point on, King had accomplished a completeness that he had not known prior. He was changed. There was something different, and there was no going back for him. The path of resistance had brought forth its transformative power. That speech that was unscripted transformed part of him and was birthing all new understandings, determination, and strength. The good news is you and me, we all have that same ability to have the path of resistance bring us to that transformative living, that path of completion. We don't have to wait on somebody else to do it. So go out there, go unscripted, and allow the path to move you into transformation. Transformation gives us strength to keep moving forward, to live with purpose, to live with passion, and not be afraid of our own voice. I don't know about you, but I have spent most of my life being utterly terrified of my voice. It wasn't until I began to go unscripted that I realized that my voice matters. Your voice matters. Today, I believe our path of resistance is calling us as well to move deeper into transformative birth. As spiritual beings having a human experience, this too contains everything we need to live unscripted. Whatever the case, whatever the situation your path is, it all starts with resisting first and then allowing that knowledge to transform us and change us. So how does it do that? There's multiple ways. One way is we choose to be the guest of someone else. And here's the part that I normally don't like. I'm not in control. That's hard. That's really hard. We listen not to respond with words that are conjuring inside our own inner-held conversations. We listen to their pain and their sorrows, their losses, their joys, their celebrations, their questions, their uncertainty, and we take off our lenses and we wear their prescription lenses instead. We come into unscripted space not to teach, but to learn. The space is no longer about distance, aloneness, isolation, indifference, differences. It is something completely foreign. It is something new being heard in our hearts, in our spirits. Something is shifting to a new place, and it's being formed that we have never seen so clearly before. It starts from the inside of our heart, flows out of our mouth, and it takes up permanent residence in our life. We're not trying to stop it. We're not trying to keep it quiet. We're not trying to hide it. It's spilling over, just like King spilled over when he went unprompted, unscripted. And we realize in a new understanding, a new sense that we are not alone. Cassandra Brene Brown, American professor, lecturer, author, and podcast host. Brown is known for her research on shame, vulnerability, and leadership. She defines transformation as, I define connection as an energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive substance and strength from the relationship. Path of resistance might begin with these labor pains. For example, we resist that connection is only energy that is only for me, that it exists to just benefit me, and there's nothing else that this self-energy connects to. But it then brings forth life, a transformative power, a path of completion that is birthed and unscripted, and how you see everyone from that point on of completion and how you treat them radically changes. Another example of a path of resistance. Early Buddhists saw attachment as a basic obstacle to enlightenment. And so they taught the method of detaching from it all. Early Buddhists shared this distanced point of view, and like us, they seldom questioned it. Been there. Grew up in a Christian church. I didn't question anything. It was prescripted. I didn't have to. They thought of themselves as individual minds separate from their surroundings, and when they sat down to meditate, their goal was personal liberation. They never believed that their enlightenment would change anything or anybody else. Enlightenment would simply mean that they had gotten free from their personal attachments, most of all attachment to the self, which they could now see as an illusion. But later, Buddhists questioned this reasoning. Path of resistance all started with this moment, this seed. If the existence of the self is an illusion, they said, then how can liberation be personal? There was something wrong with the idea that to reach enlightenment as individuals, we transcend our individuality. Later on, we see this path of resistance and path of completion coming together, because later Buddhists took to heart the idea that oneness or connection is our natural state. All of our problems arise when we begin to see ourselves as separate, and that confusion starts when we assume that our minds are the source of our own consciousness. Instead, later Buddha said that we should view consciousness as transpersonal, something that we all share. Consciousness comes first at the time of our birth, and only later on do we divide the world into you and me, human and animal, animal and inanimate. So what example can we take from all the religions that transform another coalition between these two paths? In Zen, we see this example. In Zen, we accept the view that consciousness isn't our priority, but a common resource, like air, like water, which no individual can own. And as we work through the obstacles we face on the meditation cushion and in our lives, we're actually helping to clean up a mental environment that all of us share, and one that we've all helped to degrade. Of course, this way of thinking makes enlightenment much harder to attain, since none of us will wake up completely until everybody does. But there is good news. The good news is that everyone who does something good, or even thinks about doing good, also is helping us to wake up in a much deeper sense than most people recognize. We are all in this together. Growing up Christian, I was surrounded by one path of resistance, just like the other people that grew up with me. Now, our path of resistance began with a seed that there was one way, and only one way for communing with God. There was one theology, there was one God, and there was one right way to view the world that I lived in. And above all that, that's important, but even more than all of that important information is that that path of resistance included conditional faith that was absolutely null and void unless I converted someone to my way and my Christ. That to love God, I had to ultimately think the absolute worst about myself. And I did that. But then, when my mother was diagnosed with brain tumors and lung cancer, at first I wasn't afraid. I was confident I had the right answers. I had to end all the right answers. I had God on my side. But shortly, very shortly, after my mother died, I realized that the path of resistance, my teachings, all of that had been taught to me was, for lack of a better word, very incomplete. The path of resistance for me was based on making my circle smaller, not wider, not broader. It wasn't causing me to transform. It wasn't causing me to grow or rethink or question. Everything about my path of resistance included a very important detail. It was all planned out for me. It was all scripted. There was no self-thinking. There was no self-thought. There were words, and I knew the script. They were in red, and they were in black. And that's all I needed. I had spent my entire life of resistance doing just that, but not transforming. I continued to keep people out because they were different, especially in my own community. I didn't know how to connect with people because I was disconnected from myself, and I was so heavenly minded that I was no earthly good. I didn't listen to others to learn. I listened to others so that I could prove why I was right. Death was because of my lack of faith and my punishment as a result. And ultimately, I had failed. I understood God because I only allowed myself to see God in my image. It wasn't until after my mother passed that I began to allow myself to open up to a new path of resistance that included transformation. Upon that transformation, I began and I allowed myself to question my understanding, my identity of God, if there even was a God at this point. I began to understand what Jesus, for me, truly meant when he said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." You see, when I allowed my path of resistance, my new path of resistance, to begin to transform me, Jesus, for me, wasn't further away. He became even closer. She became even closer. They became even closer. My mother, in the gift of her death, had given me the full circle of my faith and the true gift of the path of resistance and completion. The transformative power that my mother grew from that and passed on to me in her passing, it grew into something, into a beautiful human being that met incredible other transformative people who were like me, just trying to figure this thing called truth out. People that were trans, bi, questioning, undecided, showed me a piece of spirit that I had not seen before. I grew friendships that helped me to grow and to give me courage to ask the hard questions. I had people in my life that showed me unconditional love and grace. I found a faith that helped me to see that everyone is human. My brother, my sister, I was able to find a bigger circle and in a clearer understanding. I was able to connect with all of the beauty of faith and its many facets. I was free to understand. I was free to explore. And thank God, I was finally free to disagree. I was still in the image of my mother, of my father, of my creator, my God, my spirit. And it was a good and beautiful thing. I didn't live in fear of seeing beauty in everyone or the beauty of learning from those different paths. I was one of them, and they were me. We were all trying to find this truth, this live justice, to do kindness in a way of resistance and transformation that was tangible, that made sense, that was earthly good. And it's a beautiful gift, and it has kept me alive. I had been given a new understanding of faith that was expanding. I was fed from more than one table spiritually. I could pray with God, and she was not there to pray for me. We shared out of assurance, not out of fear or punishment. I finally began to see that this was bigger than me, and I saw beauty where before I had seen nothing but ugliness and titles, and them against me. Today, I still miss my mother, and that will never change. But I am truly grateful for the gift that she left for me that she didn't even know. I am grateful for what was out of my control, and that my mother's final unscripted legacy changed and allowed me the path of completion. But I will be honest, it was very hard and very painful to give up that old path of resistance. It was utterly terrifying for me, partly because I knew that I was the one that would have to change and make the adjustments. My family members weren't going to. I could no longer blindly script my lack of courage and change that onto someone else. I could no longer blame other people and see them as lost. I could no longer see people in groups and judge them for things that I didn't understand. I could no longer live or speak in scripted tones and still call myself a Christian. I could no longer refuse to remain and not grow and birth my child of transformation. There are things in my old path of resistance that did not include transformation that I truly love and still impacts my heart and my faith today. For me, I was given the opportunity to meet my best friend, and one that has truly stood by me. Jesus, for me, became my world, my everything, and still holds true to this day. I was able to find joy in singing hymns, center myself through song. I was able to find a respect and a reverence for Scripture and find God in there somehow, some way. So there's many things that despite the bad, I did love. However, as much as I loved those things, I love this path much better because it's a full path of completion. My best friend and I have an unscripted relationship that's just ours. It's not in black, it's not in red. There's no formula to it. It's not scripted, it's not regulated by another human being, it's not regulated by dogma, theology, or hierarchy. It's one that finds God's Spirit in every facet of other spiritual beings having a human experience. I can see Scripture from other places and still use Scripture. I know, and it expands and gives me new meaning, new understanding. I can wake up and live in a world that is still worth trying to find connection. I can sing hymns with different vocabulary and still feel refreshed and refueled and inspired. The circle doesn't get smaller, it gets much larger. Today, we are in a place as a collective consciousness that needs the path of resistance to be fully birthed. We are in desperate need of that life to collectively continue to move forward, not back. I still choose, despite what I see most of the day, is that not everything is lost. Perhaps it is someone just like me that has a shift in life. That shift happens and allows for a new path to be planted and unscripted, and then things begin to happen. That starting point, though, isn't necessarily bad, and I don't believe that should just be thrown out altogether. But just like the early example of early Buddhist beliefs, it was pivotal for the next step. In that beginning, that understanding that they initially had, that led to another door that led to questions, which led to searching, re-examining, and ultimately birth of transformation. So don't stop at the seed. Keep cultivating, watering, making adjustments, and do it as often as necessary. When I became ordained in 2013, there was a statement that really stood out to me. It said, "Whatever you do, do no harm." And I don't think that that's just a good motto to live by for ordination. I also think it's a good path, a full understanding of this path that we're talking about today. When we combine these two elements, transformation and the path of resistance, we, just like King, just like Zen, we begin to live in a world that does no harm. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to just wake up and do no harm? We live unscripted and realize that there's more to give. There's more room at the table, and there are no borders. Perhaps that is what Jesus was talking about when he referenced many rooms. Perhaps Jesus was living out this truth, and he was finally on his path to completion. Don't let this rattle you. You trust God, don't you? Trust me. There is plenty of room for you in my Father's home. If that weren't so, would I have told you that on my way to get a room ready for you? And if I'm on my way to get your room ready, I'll come back and I'll get you so you can live where I live. I think that is a beautiful example of Jesus finally coming into completion and understanding that we're all in this together. So come beside me. Come next to each other. Let's come together and experience a born-again life, one that continues to give birth every day and isn't just content to plant the seeds. No. Let's give birth to many collective consciousness, and as humans begin to see just how big this world can become, let's open the door and let all of Spirit come in and dance with us. It is possible, and I truly believe it is necessary every single day, not just occasionally. Jay Holm is an award-winning transgender performance poet, speaker, and educator. Alongside his writing and regular performances, he teaches in schools, performs sensitivity reads and consults, speaks of events at conferences on the importance of diversity in the media, and more specifically, transgender inclusion and rights. I also wanted to include this poem because it truly is the heart of my best friend and a shining example of bringing the path of resistance and transformation into living existence. And it is entitled, Jesus at the Gay Bar. He's here. He's here in the midst of it. He's right there. He's right at the center of the dance floor. Robes hitched up to his knees to make it easy to spin. And at some point in the evening, a boy will touch the hem of his robe and beg to be healed. Beg to be anything other than this. And he will reach his arms out, sweat damped and weary from dancing. He will cup the boy's face in his hand and say, "My beautiful child, there is nothing in this heart of yours that ever needs to be healed." Namaste.